My name's Amanda Kilo, and like I said, I'm in manufacturing and aerospace, and I will be moderating today's event. So the questions will be behind the women, and they're also in front of them, and I'll be asking the question, and we'll have a few questions answered. And if you could just hold your individual questions that come up till the end, when we'll have an open Q&A. So I'd like to start with allowing the women to introduce themselves again before we begin. So Ellen will introduce herself.
Okay, I am Ellen Kane. I actually started out as a computer programmer when there was no computer science major in college. So, but I was a math major. So I was a computer programmer that ended up working for a software company that made manufacturing software. And that's how I got into manufacturing. And after working at the software company, I then went to work. Am I doing more than I did? Okay. I went to work for some actual manufacturing companies and worked for 3 different manufacturing companies, a variety of products, computer printers, 2 printer companies, and a JBL loudspeakers, so loudspeaker manufacturing. And after working about 15 years or so, doing 15 to 20 years doing that kind of stuff, I then left and formed my own consulting firm. And for over 20 years I did my own consulting. I have my own consulting firm. I am now happily mostly retired, except for my environment, working with APICS still, because I've been on the board for a long time. But my career has been really interesting because I went through the whole women's movement when women's lib was just starting, and made some, I don't know, did you go through that? Some of it, yeah. I was right there at the forefront. So I have a few stories to share about then and now. Anyway, I'm happy to be here. Thank you. Okay.
So my name is Shannon Reininger. I started my career, actually my internship was with Campbell Soup Mushroom Farm. My dad is a mushroom farmer, and as he says, a mushroom farmer is the only one who has to produce his own dirt. So it is production. I have worked for aerospace, I've worked for kitchen and bath manufacturing, tubs and faucets, or not faucets, but tubs and sinks, and I've worked for biotech, so I've worked in most of the industries. And I've mostly been in supply chain and operations, but I took a few years where I was asked to do the safety program, so environmental health and safety and compliance. So you never know where your career might take you, and now I'm doing a little bit of that again, as it's gaining momentum at my current employer. So that's kind of what I've been part of.
Again, my name is Kelly Ford. Thank you for asking me to be here. So it was really interesting to mull over this list of questions because it really made me reflect and some things I haven't pondered in many, many years. But I, right immediately out of college, went into manufacturing. Could not find a job to save my life, and I moved to the West Coast from Michigan. And my uncle had a startup medical device manufacturing company. And so he got tired of seeing me laying around the house, so he put me to work in his company. And I did that for a number of years, then I moved into aerospace, and I worked in aerospace for 30-some years. 12 of them at Sergeant Fletcher, 13 of them at Esterline. Worked in energetics, Aerojet, ordnance, and inside Bickford, aerospace and defense in the explosives areas. Never really made a positive decision to go into manufacturing. I just headed out from the outset, I think, and ended up there quite by accident, I suppose.
All right, so I'm Lisa Anderson, and I am president of LMA Consulting. I started off, I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and really didn't know what I wanted to do. I looked at math, and I thought, for a while I do that, and I thought, no, definitely not. Then I went into, then I thought accounting, and then I definitely not. And then basically, and I tried computer programming, and I thought, oh, I don't think so. That's not good either. And then basically I found operations management, and that seemed to be like a great home, because it had a lot of ways you could manage multiple variables and come out, you have more of an impact. At least that's the way I saw it. So I ended up graduating with a degree in business with an emphasis in operations, and then I started right from there, utilizing a sort of like the student case competition that we have today. A senior project that was like that. I used that at Coca-Cola in Los Angeles to get my first job as a planner and supervising of distribution, to say what they made on the production lines. So I started off at Coca-Cola, and then I went to a plastic injection molder a few years later, and then I spent the next several years at a absorbent products manufacturer that made like adult diapers and the pads that go underneath chicken in the grocery stores. And I did every job there was, in essence, in supply chain and operations, and I ended up as the vice president of operations and supply chain, as we bought two businesses, one a division of P&G and a smaller entrepreneurial company, at the same time that we went live with a new system, which was pretty much a disaster to do all those things together. So it spurred on this like never-ending saga of reducing inventory to free up cash. Then I got promoted, and then we relaunched product lines, straightened out manufacturing. It was like never-ending. But we ended up, it was excellent experience. We ended up selling off the business for a profit, and I didn't know what I was going to do after that job. And I just read a book that said, if you want to consult, you shouldn't do it between jobs. You should either do it or not do it. I knew I could help companies save money, but I really didn't have any idea how to find them. And then I read a book that said you just had to provide value, and I thought I could do that. So then I decided to go into consulting and give it a try for at least a year. And then I enjoyed it. So, and it was, of course, harder than just providing value, but it's true that that's the cornerstone to success, is providing value. Because without that, you have no hope. But of course, it's harder than that to find clients. So, but I am still here, 13 years later, consulting. So, I'm enjoying it. So that's where I am today.
So my name is Roanne Yowie. As I told you guys, I'm currently working at Fashion Nova, and I also have my own clothing line. And I went to Georgia Tech, so an engineering school, nothing related to fashion. I get that question a lot if I went to fashion school, and I tell them no, I went to Georgia Tech. And a lot of people here don't know what that is, but I would hope that a lot of you guys, since you come from a more technical background, might know. But when I graduated college, I had no idea. I was looking at corporate jobs, maybe like patent law or marketing, and I stumbled on an opportunity to work in a retail store, which I didn't have any experience in, but I was a customer there. It's called Torrid. It's a plus size store, and that's kind of what got me into the industry, and also led to my expertise in plus sizes specifically. So the retail industry, as many of you know, is suffering and struggling, and one of, I guess, the beacons of hope would be plus sizes, and it is continuing to grow. So I knew that as a customer early on, that if I put myself into the industry and I committed myself to learning how things were made and learning what the struggles were and the challenges that retailers and manufacturers were having when it came to plus sizes, that if I applied my personal experience to that, I would be able to just kind of dominate. And that's essentially what happened, thankfully. I succeeded at Torrid. I went on and worked at several of the big retailers in the country. I was at Forever 21 for over 7 years. I came in very shortly after they launched plus sizes, and maybe a couple months after they launched, and I led the global growth for plus sizes at Forever 21. I also oversaw a big piece of their international expansion into Latin America and the Middle East and several other parts. And all throughout my career, because of being focused on plus sizes, I've had to be especially hands-on when it comes to technical design, to monitoring my production, to being like really involved at every stage, as opposed to kind of being like focused on design or being focused on the marketing piece or maybe just e-commerce. I've had to own it from top to bottom, just because it's just a market segment that is, you know, still kind of neglected and misunderstood. And so, you know, to really be the redheaded stepchild of any organization I've joined and been charged with trying to grow this business that everyone says is out there, but they're not sure how to capture it. You just kind of have to own every step. So many nights I've come home and discussed with Amanda my challenges at work and trying to figure out how to get things done and how to get things made and meet minimums and deal with just struggles with importing and everything. And we found that there is a lot of crossover between what she has to deal with and what I have to deal with. So even though I deal with clothing and apparel, non-apparel, whatever, it sounds like we have a lot of the same challenges. So hopefully I'll be able to give you some insight into what I do and provide some value with my feedback and input.
Thank you. So that covered our first question, which is briefly share your roles in manufacturing and what led you to this career. So we're going to dive into the second question. Can you describe some of your early experiences in manufacturing and what challenges or victories did you face early on in your career in manufacturing or related? So it's open to anybody that's interested in this.
Everybody's looking.
Go ahead.
You said you had interesting stories to share.
Teed it up, Ellen. Well, actually, the first job I had was as a computer programmer for a company that maintained parts catalogs for the airlines companies. Parts catalogs which contained every single part of every single airline and which company manufactured the airline and which airline owned the plane. It was all done, I mean, it was a lot of data processing. And I became a supervisor of programming. And I remember a person coming in to hire, a man coming in to get hired as a programmer working in the area that I was in. And I think after he'd been there a while, he said to me, you know, if I had known that I was going to be working for a woman, I would not have taken the job. So it was like a wake-up call. It's like, why are you even saying that? I mean, we're all here because we can do the work. You know, I mean, that was really my feeling. I also encountered when I was working at a couple of the different manufacturing companies that I didn't really go into what my role was, but I left data processing in a way. I stayed in data processing, but I went to work for a manufacturing company. And then from the manufacturing company, I then moved out of data processing, although I still had responsibility for the IT department. I also had responsibility for planning, master scheduling, and for shipping. So I kind of had a lot of how the factory was running. I didn't have the operational side of the actual execution, but I had everything else working for me. And one of the things was recognizing that in order to not be recognized as just an IT person, I had to actually change companies. I had to come in as a project manager in another company, not working for the IT department. And then once I was there, then they asked me to run IT. So, but that was, I tried to get out of that. But one of the things was when we implemented the ERP system at one of the companies that I was at, there were a couple of men that ran the operations side. We had two facilities within the same factory, and we had managers, and both of them were actually measured by what they had been measured by for a long time was their productivity. And they made two products. They made a gray product and they made a black product. They were identical, but the engineering standards were different. And the black product was more popular, was used many times more, but the gray product, for some reason, they earned more production hours. Although the same thing, they were identical. The only difference
was the painting, identical drawings. So, of course, the first day that we started the new ERP system, we gave them a production schedule and said, this is what you're supposed to build. And this guy that for years had been running the operations facility, decided to use his own methods for deciding what was going to get built. And so he did not build the black products, which was what we needed. Instead, he built the gray products. And the result was that we did not have enough parts to build the black product because one of the processes was to paint the parts. So we used up all the parts we needed for black by painting them gray. Okay? That sound familiar?
Yeah.
Because he was earning hours.
Yeah.
And we had, one of the things that we had done was we had trained them to say, you are no longer going to be measured that way. What we're trying to do is achieve a schedule. And the schedule is what our customers need. So, once I realized that that was happening, I did go to my manager, who at the time was the president of the company, and very strongly suggested that some action be taken to make sure that this person didn't do that again. He resisted quite a lot, and they eventually let him go, and he was a very long-time employee. But, you know, when you do something new in a company, it's hard. There are people who resist, and it's difficult to get the resistors because they're very comfortable doing what they've done for a long time, and they figure, well, I've been here 20 years, I guess it's, you know, I can keep doing it. So he was not too happy. Needless to say.
Leave it open. Would anybody else like to share any challenges or victories they had?
Well, I think one of the surprises for me, and coming into operations at the time that I did, so I stumbled into it sort of like Lisa did. I thought I was going to get a business degree in finance or accounting, and then I went to a business conference that was hosted, and students were allowed to go for free, and they had all these different classes. So it was kind of like an APICS conference with all different kinds of stuff. And I stumbled into one where they were doing production scheduling and operations. I thought, okay, so how do I get a degree in this? Where's this class? So I changed my major into production and operations management. And I was the only female in any class from that point on. And then they dissolved the industrial engineering program in a nearby college and merged the two programs together. So then we got like this crossover industrial engineering, and I ended up taking a class where you actually had to make parts on a mill and a lathe, which I don't think any operations students do anymore. And so I really got that crossover function that happened, but there just weren't any other females in any of those classes from that point on. And as I got into jobs, there weren't any females applying, and I knew, my name is Shannon, which I've met men named Shannon and women named Shannon, and I know that I have been to interviews before where they expected a guy to be in that room. And it's really obvious. It's really obvious when they thought they had invited a man for that interview. And that's not who was there. And the other really surprising thing for me is how few operations managers at that time had degrees. Very, very few. Almost all of them had risen through the ranks. They had product expertise, company expertise, but none of them had any education beyond high school. So I ended up writing my boss's stuff, his boss's stuff. Nobody could write a report, nobody could write sentences, nobody could write articles for company newsletters, and I ended up doing a lot of people's writing. And so all of the stuff that was coming out of operations in our big aerospace company was all coming from me. So I was the spokesperson making people around me look better. And that was kind of an interesting thing, that I just didn't expect that would happen, that they would be looking for someone who could express themselves in writing. And that was just around the time that we went from printed memos to having email. When I went to college, we learned Microsoft was in my workplace but not in my college. So in those 2 years of graduating and finishing school, everything we learned in school had become Microsoft. and had been adopted into there. So very different as it just transitioned from that written to the electronic. And it exposed very quickly those who could not write. Because now nobody was putting out their stuff anymore. And it was a very interesting time to see that happen.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. So, what would be like, describe for us an aha moment, like this just is like a highlight, like the most amazing moment in your career, or something that just went click, now I understand this better?
I'll field that one. So early on in my career, I got a mentor who was actually my boss at the time. He was horrendously type A, a real take no prisoners kind of guy, very successful, but he was a hard you know what. And I think I connected with, I mean, my father was very much the same way, so I felt so at home with this man, and he kind of took me under his wing. But, and I was successful as an individual contributor, putting out that effect in terms of my career and my professional attitude and the way I dealt with people in situations. Again, very successful, but there was a point in time where, as I wanted to continue to climb the ladder, as they say, and wanted to get bigger jobs. I was a program manager at the time. And I was successful in program managing because I had that attitude. It's like, by God, you're going to work my program, you're going to get my hardware done, I want the and I made it happen. And my company allowed me to behave in that way. But there came a time where that was no longer working for me. And my company realized my value, thank goodness, but they also were not real happy about my behavior. And so I was assigned a professional coach. And at the time I was furious and very hurt and very skeptical about the whole process. But I gotta tell you, in terms of an aha moment and a career defining, a career shifting, probably a better way of putting it, I worked with a professional coach for probably 8 to 10 months, I think it was. And I gotta tell you, this woman, I still get LinkedIn stuff from her, she's neat, really taught me that there is a different approach, and that really it's the bees with honey. It's treat people with dignity, treat people the way you want to be treated. And we grew up hearing this stuff from our parents, right? But I had this role model and such this example in front of me that I wanted to emulate. I didn't see there was any other way to get to where I wanted to go. So this was the shift in my career where I started to climb the ladder, where I started to manage people and manage people very successfully. But it was just a big shift in my head. You don't have to be a hard ass, pardon my language, to get things done. And people are so much more motivated if they know you care about them, if you listen, if you put yourself up to learn from them. So that was huge for me.
Well, there, a couple of them reminded me of some of the stories from my past. So when I first started that vice president of operations and supply chain role, I had several people, well, almost everybody that was reporting to me was older than I was. And so the director of purchasing, who had been around the block, was really good, was not happy about this because he was more old school in a way, although not his purchasing methods. And so he, he went to the CEO and said, I don't want to report to her. But the CEO said, no, give it a try. You need to try to do this. And so anyway, I didn't know about that at the time, but like Kelly said, eventually, I didn't know anything about purchasing as compared to him actually. However, I could coordinate between the departments and I could learn and I could be supportive of him. So he would set up all sorts of meetings as we went to see suppliers, and I, played my part, and I got built it over time. But really, by being upfront with people, being in there with them, with the team, went a long way. And by the end of when we when I left that company, he was like one of my biggest fans. So, and he still reported to me. So he went from being a complete skeptic, not sure he wanted to do this at all, to be one of my biggest fans. And really, it was just, you know, by treating people the way you'd want to be treated, to your point. So, and it was, and actually, he's related to another story that reminded me, I think when Ellen was talking, because there was private equity backers that we had found, and they were from the UK, so they were really conservative. They weren't happy at all about having a young woman leading manufacturing. They wanted a gray-haired man from Harvard. And they told the CEO that. And the CEO said, you know, I don't care, because she gets results, I'm sticking with her. So I wouldn't have been where I am today without the CEO. So I was telling the story earlier today to some students, because then he asked me to do something later, and of course I had to say yes. The other person I have to say yes to is Ellen, so she came up with this story too. Those are the two people. But anyway, beyond that, how this purchasing person came back into the story is I was, you know, in this role, trying to deal with this board of directors. Wasn't easy because I didn't really know everything. I didn't know what I didn't know. I could get results, but I really didn't know anything about dealing with board of directors. And then the CEO would be like, just be yourself because you know everything. And then he'd say, but tell him this and tell him this. And I'm like, what? How am I going to do all this? Very stressful. But basically the purchasing person came to one of the meetings, and there was a whole board of directors there, and then he said, Lisa, did you realize you're the only woman here? And I said, no, I didn't. I mean, I looked around, and I said, yeah, you're right. Because I just never noticed. I mean, I just carried on. Like, it didn't bother me, and then people didn't see that as a problem. Well, I mean, other than the board, but most people didn't see it as a problem if you don't see it as a problem, is what I found from that. And it was the purchasing guy who, you know, he was just like, he was probably feeling really proud that he worked for me at that point. Now, you know, because we had come the other way. So anyway, it was kind of a cool situation.
Can I add something to that? When I got promoted to Vice President of Strategic Planning at JBL, I was called into the office of the owner of the company, who was Sydney Harmon, who you might have heard the name Jane Harmon. Some of you, she was a congresswoman for a long time. Sydney Harmon donated a lot of funds. Harmon Kardon, speakers on it. He was the owner of the company. And he actually told me, because the president had decided that he wanted to promote me. And he said to me, he said, I want you to know you are my token woman for being a vice president in this company. There were 7 other top, like 6 vice presidents and a president, and then me. And I looked at him and I said, I will be your token as long as I get all the same perks as everybody else. And he said, okay. Now, I don't know salary-wise, I'm sure I wasn't making the same salary that they were, but I did get a car allowance, and I did get stock options, and like from that moment on, that was kind of a big, I wasn't really going to take the job. I mean, I wanted the job, but I wasn't going to, they actually created a position for me. And then the person that we know who was head of the company, had an off-site session with his VPs. He was the president of the company, not the owner, this was the president. And the spouses were invited. So my husband, who is a comedy writer, says to me, is there going to be a lingerie show? And I said, I don't know, maybe there will be, because there's going to be 6 women and you. But he was telling me the other night, he said, one of the things he noticed, because he used to tell me, oh, you're going away with, it's going to be Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, because they were all short. One of the things he would say to me is, that he noticed was at this, when we were all at dinner together, he said the men all talked to him. They like
Of course.
brought him into the group, and he said he actually had to like extricate himself away from that, because, you know, they were sort of, I was one of the guys, but not fully, you know. So it was a very interesting experience.
So it ties in a little bit to the next question. Any experience that you had that was completely unexpected or that shattered some sort of stereotype or paradigm that you had in your course?
I mean, I can tell you guys one, and it's still I face it every day still, but I had thought that the reason that there wasn't anybody besides like Leighton Bryant doing anything in plus sizes when it came to like apparel production was that people just didn't want to do it. So I thought there was a stigma against people, especially women, being bigger, being curvier, and I thought people just, you know, they're snobby when it comes to fashion, and they don't want to dress this woman, and they haven't really tried to pay attention to how much money she has to spend, and it was just an oversight. And once I got into the industry and I started trying to develop, you know, certain styles for the plus size customer specifically, I had found out that actually more people were much more interested and actually just didn't know what to do. So they weren't sure, you know, they thought, you know, there were all these stereotypes of she doesn't love herself, she doesn't want to dress that way, so we're not going to bother trying to deal with making the patterns and finding people to sew them, and, you know, and it was even struggles down to like the fabric isn't wide enough to be able to make the right size up to a size 3X or a 4X or a 5X. A lot of the machines that, you know, they use, like especially to make sweaters or to make like hosiery, like they're all made for much smaller specs than what we would need to fit a plus size woman. So they actually were interested in trying to solve the problem, but they did not have the tools, and it had not even dawned on me that that would be the issue. I had assumed that it was, you know, they didn't want to deal with it, and it was actually the opposite. They were all, not all, there are still some people who are, you know, against it, but most of the people in manufacturing and in production and pattern making are very interested. They just don't know what to do, and they don't know how to solve the issues of the limitations, you know, that they have when it comes to certain machines or, you know, the fabric width or whatever. So now there are more people invested in saying, okay, if we're going to service customers from a size like 1 up to, let's say, a size 26 in women's, what is that, when we lay those patterns out, what does that look like? How wide do we need to knit the fabric to begin with, or weave the fabric to begin with, so that we can get the most out of it, to be able to service that size, instead of doing the opposite and saying, okay, now we have this super narrow fabric and we want to make these plus sizes and we can't get it to fit. So it's completely changing, which is good, and it's just, I think it's refreshing, but there are still some roadblocks that we hit where, you know, I'm like, why do we not have this, or how come this is so difficult to find or to make? And then I'm realizing that things were just set up so long ago in a way that didn't take this customer into account or these specs into account, and now we're trying to figure out how to go back and make it work. So.
Anybody else like to answer four? We'll jump ahead. So what are some of the challenges that you have faced working with national or international manufacturers?
Well, I think I've worked with both international manufacturers and then a company wanting to participate internationally. The biggest, I think the prevailing issue is protecting your technical data and your intellectual property. That's key. And we have all kinds of regulations now and ITAR and such to help protect this, but still very much ran into you know, the customers or other manufacturers and licensing arrangements and such, getting a hold of your drawings, getting a hold of the sketchers or undimensioned assembly drawings, and completely reverse engineering them. So even now, you'll probably hear, not every day, but every week certainly, that we are losing our design and our manufacturing prowess to international manufacturers, and that's something we need to continue to be very vigilant of, and it's prevalent. Absolutely.
And it's grown over the years
Oh,
as
yes.
people have become more understanding of how to reverse engineer and
Mhm.
manufacture things.
Exactly.
I think one of the issues that I saw a lot in the consulting, when I worked mostly with smaller manufacturers in a variety of products, when the idea was, oh, they could get it built for cheaper, they didn't really understand all the hidden costs. And one client in particular decided to move almost all of the manufacturing that they were doing in-house to China. And what they discovered was they had to, and they were all, it was make to stock. Their product was a make to stock product. So they had to have like additional inventory because so much of it was on the water at the time. So that there was all this extra inventory and all the managing of and trying to coordinate it and all this kind of stuff. So I think, and then I think the trend now has been to bring some of that stuff back.
Insource.
Yeah, to
Yes.
insource, yeah. So a lot of clients I work with got really excited about being able to cheap labor. That was what they were looking for, but they didn't realize all the other costs that went along with that.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, that some, small or large, some of the largest companies that clearly should have plenty of money to figure it out, just got on the wavelength, just got on the bandwagon, really. There's no logic. They just said, we need to outsource everything to China or whatever, and they just did it. I actually had the head of, I think it was Dow on my, it was another D, anyway, it was a really big company that's international, and they sent all their manufacturing to China, and then he said that they found out it wasn't the smartest plan. So then they ended up bringing it all back as far as what was supporting customers here, and they just left the manufacturing in China to support the Asian customers. But there was just a lot of my clients have had issues where they don't look at the total cost, or they're not looking at cost at all, especially in the larger companies. It might be just a corporate dictate. You're moving this to Mexico. Could be twice as much money, but it's just the dictate. So, I help some of those folks try to push back with at least facts so that they can have their have their information heard, and then if they go, they go. But at least that way later, if things blow up, they've provided the information type of thing.
I think one of the challenges I've found, and it would be the same international, when I haven't done international visits of sites or suppliers, is that, as a female you go in and they can be very patronizing. Like, oh, you don't know what we do here, you don't know how this works, you don't know anything about how things are made, right? And then they will not really share with you the truth, but then I walk through the shop and I'm with them and then I start asking them about very specific stuff, and then it's like, sometimes I have made people very red in the face because of what their assumptions were, that, oh, you're a female, you don't know, you can't possibly understand mechanical engineering, right? And I hope that gets less, but I have run into that a lot as I've made site visits in working with companies.
So what advice would you give to other women working in manufacturing or considering working in manufacturing? And new women.
So I would say that that manufacturing is a really great career. It's in Southern California, we're #1 in the U.S. in manufacturing. People think it's dead and that it's gone. It's not. And it's also very much evolving to become more technology oriented, the use of robotics and automation. So there's a lot to be said for pursuing a career in manufacturing. It doesn't have to be the hard hat, male oriented. I mean, I think there's plenty of opportunity for both men and women. And I would say, don't look at it like I'm a woman going into manufacturing. Look at it like you're a person and I'm going to be successful in manufacturing. That's what I did. And then if I didn't see myself as this woman in manufacturing, no one else pretty much saw me that way either. I mean, really 80-20, you never 100%. 80-20, that's how people saw me because that's how I saw myself. So I think if you use that attitude, you'd be successful.
I think my advice would be to really keep in your head, the only folks who really add value are the people on the shop floor, the people touching the hardware. Everybody else is to support those folks. So the notion that you don't belong out there, I would advise anybody, get comfortable being out in that factory. Get comfortable listening and observing and learning the process. Be comfortable asking questions. Be comfortable in that environment. And you know, if you have designs on certainly being in manufacturing, but you know, rising in the manufacturing organization with respect to leadership, really put yourself out there to learn. People can pick that up. They can sense a genuine interest and a knowledge that these people are important to us. They're not just hourly workers. They are the foundation for all we do and all the decisions we make. So it's always really benefited me personally is to want to spend time out there. Don't sit in your office and wait for things to cross your desk. Go out and learn. To me, it's infinitely more interesting being out in that factory than being behind my own desk. People can pick that up. They'll be responsive to you. If anything in my career has benefited me, it's just that whole attitude. Be out there and be comfortable.
I think Kelly's absolutely right, because I remember when I first got the role of Vice President of Operations, like, and then I was taking over this plant that was the P&G plant. It was one of the plants that I was working with, and I remember that I used to do these around-the-clock meetings, and so I'd come, like, obviously 3 times during the day and have these conversations. And then at the beginning, no one would ever ask any questions in this other plant. And the only guy who asked a question was like, well, like, how long are you going to be here? And, you know, that kind of stuff. So I'm like, well, all right, let me answer this. So, but, you know, if you keep it up, like Kelly said, if you show an interest, you ask questions, and you're really fighting for them, but you also hold them accountable, so you have to do both. Then, you know, you gain the respect. You know, like 3-4 years later, they were, you know, the same people, the same guy was, you know, excited that I was doing the round-the-clock meetings, and they had lots of questions, because by then they trust you. It takes time. They have to know that you are interested and care about what's going on. At the same time, they don't want you to be a pushover. Even they might say they do, but they don't. You know, they want you to hold them accountable. So it's you know, I find that you have to keep going to some degree, and spending time on the floor goes a long way for them to respect you. But also, it's asking good questions. Like, I had plenty of people reporting to me, and I sat in plenty of meetings where I had no idea whatsoever what we were talking about as far as like the details, you know, as far as how this machine would run better. I had no idea at all. However, I did know enough to ask some good questions about, like, you know, listening to the conversation. I could say, well, wait a minute, you just said that this goes with that, and you know, how come now you're changing that to a different scenario or whatever. I asked good questions by listening. And I found that, like, I gained the respect of the R&D person, who also didn't want to report to me. But he said eventually, you know, like, you ask really good questions, and I can't get away with anything. So I'm just going to tell you up front. Okay, well, I didn't know you were trying to. But anyway, basically the thing is that, you know, I think if you don't have to know everything. That's what I'm trying to say. You can come up with some good questions if you're paying attention.
It's good to admit, excuse me, it's good to admit that you don't know.
It's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
I didn't try to pretend.
Yeah. So I was gonna say, I think women have more of a tendency to be more open about not knowing everything, but are open to learning about it. And in a really genuine way. I mean, I had that same experience. I didn't really realize I was doing it. The last project I worked on was putting on barcodes on the factory floor on all the products. We were making 400 pallets a day of loudspeakers. That was a large volume. We had, and one of the things that happened was I had to work with the manufacturing people, the shipping people, you know, a lot of different people in the company for that particular project. And then shortly after that, it was time for me to leave. They actually wanted me to let go of the manager of the IT department, and who worked for me. And I knew that if I had to get rid of him, that I was going to have to go back and spend more time in that area. So I suggested that they let go of me instead. And that's how I started my consulting business. But at the going away party, which, excuse me, was a potluck lunch that my husband was invited to, and the VP, who was my boss at that time, of operations, came to, there were 75 people that showed up in this company, and I knew all of them by name. And he was sitting with my husband, and he said, how does she know all these people? Now, this was the guy that was the head of the organization. Thank you very much. He was the head of the organization, and he never spent any time out on the floor. He was an engineer by trade, and he was very comfortable talking with engineers and not comfortable talking with shop floor people. So I think, you know, being honest and open and willing to listen, and even just a simple thing like greeting people in the morning, it doesn't take very long to do that, but it makes a huge impact.
It totally, go ahead. I was gonna say, it totally does, because as far as a bad story about me, so basically when I first started, when I was pretty young in my career, like, I don't know, I was focused on what we were doing, so who knew that everybody pays attention to, like, if you say hello and those kinds of things. So, like, I had somebody complain about that to me, thank goodness, that, like, you know, like, you don't like me, and I was like, what are you talking about? I didn't even see you. But basically, I was just, like, walking, so, you know, you learn that you have to pay attention to, I mean, it sounds silly, but you really do have to pay attention to what you're doing and what you're saying to people. And this was before I was in the vice president role. That would have probably been a disaster if they, you know, because I was sitting in actually a cubicle, which was, I thought, good because it put me with people, you know, like I was able to know what was really going on. But then on the other hand, everybody pays attention to everything you say and interprets things that aren't true. So you have to, you know, you just have, basically what you just said is totally true though. You have to pay attention to the people around you. And so I learned that early on, but whoever that was, I should thank them, but I don't remember who it was.
So I just want to add something, maybe a little bit different line to that. So be ready every time you have an opportunity to go inside another facility. Go ready for a plant tour. You know, wear the right shoes, wear long sleeves, wear long pants so that nobody ever has to look at you and say, oh, sorry, you can't come in the shop. Or feel like they have to break factory rules in order to take you there. You know, take that as an opportunity because you will learn every time you're in a factory. But if you're going to work in manufacturing, you need to just absorb all that kind of stuff every time you're there. I've also found when I was younger, I've been in manufacturing since I got out of college, right? And you know, you just look like someone's daughter when you're many older. I mean, face it, a lot of the manufacturing employees are a little bit older. And when I would give them a way to make it more comfortable to talk to me, not just thinking I'm just some young lady on the floor and what am I doing there, I would just give them an out, give them an easy way to make that comfortable, and say, hey, my dad has a shop, I've worked in the shop, I grew up in a family of girls, I'm the oldest of 7, I've worked in the shop with him. Suddenly, everybody was okay with that. Okay, if your dad's okay with it, if you came from a shop, you're part of a family, suddenly it was just like, oh, well, now it's okay to tell you. So if you're running into things like that, find a way to help people have an out, have a way to think that you belong there or they have a connection there. And it was easy to say, oh, it was my dad, because then they could all connect to that. So if you're running into those kind of things, see if you can find a way to make that comfortable for people.
Yeah, you know, that's a really good point, like being open, or, I'm not even sure how to say this, but it's sort of like, be relatable and be somebody who seems like they're interested in the information, and that you're gonna try to do something with it. You're not just, you know, like, there's one client I work with where it's like, he would ask lots of questions, they just weren't relevant, and it didn't seem like he was gonna do a thing with it, so that doesn't work. But if you seem like you really are interested and you're gonna do something to help them, what I found is with my clients, they all have all the answers in their facilities. It's just that they don't have the time, perhaps, to put it together, or they don't know, you know, where to capture all the data from. But I find that people in their facilities tell me they have the answers. They tell me what the you know, how best to do something, and it's just a matter of figuring out which ones and getting them to open up to you, and then helping them implement. So you can go a long way if people realize you're there to help.
Thank you. So we're gonna shift a little bit. I'd like to talk about mentors. We've been hearing a lot lately about how important it is to have a mentor as a young employee, and I wanna know if either or any of you have had a mentor before, and what has been your experience with that, and do you think there was a benefit in any way, and what's that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. It's a huge benefit. My experience with that is I've not had many that were formal. Here is your mentor, shake hands, you know, start mentoring. I think you naturally gravitate toward people, people you work with, potentially. What I've also found is that throughout your career, your needs and that the identity of the mentor will change. You may have 5, I jotted down about 6 people who were really significant to me in my career, and at different points in my career, I had different needs, and not one person can meet all your needs, but as you go through, you will connect with the people who can give you what you need, and be ready for that and be open to that would be my advice. It's a hugely beneficial practice.
So I have a follow-on question about that. With your experience in having such good mentors at different phases in your career, have you had any mentees?
Again, I think informally, yes, and maybe from my experience, I don't know if that's the way it works best, because I don't really understand the formal relationship piece, but I would say that there have been people in my past. I'm very proud of a couple of these where I think my most proud example is the gal who was actually brought in the union to one of the facilities that I worked at. She was key in the organizing effort. And, you know, one day I would have probably grabbed her by the neck and squeezed. But I connected with her after that organizing was finished. And so she started out as an hourly employee, then a union steward, and by the time I left, she was a manufacturing manager. And just to bring her up through that whole process was so incredibly rewarding for me. There's no experience like that, and she was so receptive and so willing, and it does as much for you as it does for them. So that's a huge process, and to me that's really what being a leader, an operations leader is. You've got to start grooming and preparing and readying the next generation that comes after you.
Yeah, I worked a lot with Hispanic employees at the department, and I had one employee who worked in the shipping department who did not speak great English, but he was very smart, and you could really tell he was smart. So I did work with him and encouraged him to improve his English skills because he actually wanted to get into the engineering department, and ended up being the one that eventually ran all the bills of materials, created all the bills and kept them up to date. Because he was very curious and very understanding, but he needed that English to be able to do it well. And that was one of the things when I left that company at that going away party. Many people came up to me and said, you know, you were our role model as a female in this company, because there weren't a lot of strong women in the company. And to this day, I'm still friends with a lot of them, but a lot of the men as well. You know, I mean, I really don't differentiate. I always viewed myself as I just had a job to do, and I was gonna do it. I always felt like maybe as a female I had to prove myself a little more than some of the men did, because then it seemed like some of the men, unfortunately, could get more comfortable with the men that were in power, and when it came time to promotion, that sometimes that was one of the factors that went into it. How comfortable they felt working with whoever that person was, which in some ways was attributed to them being more comfortable with them, maybe on a social level or whatever. So I had to work a lot harder at that, and I know that I did. But I didn't really mind doing it because I really enjoyed the work, and I thought it was very rewarding, and especially having, I think being the mentor when you had enough experience. I definitely had mentors along the way, but reversing that and being a mentor to others is certainly in the latter part of my career. It's been something that I've enjoyed with a lot of my consulting clients. I've worked with a lot of those companies for 10 or 15 years, on and off, and there's usually one or two key people within those organizations that I've worked closely with that I've maintained relationships with, and that's been great.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same. Is I've had like probably 6 mentors as well, and I have to say that there was only 1, maybe 2, of those that were women, and the rest were men. And I never went to any of them and said, "Will you be my mentor?" I'm not. Sometimes I think that could work fine, but they were more. It was more informal. But without them, I wouldn't have been successful. On the other hand, you know, I like Ellen said, now I find people in each client that I end up working with that are, you know, like sort of unsung heroes in a lot of my clients that I can help, and so that's kind of that's great, as well as working with a lot of students. But there's one story I just love, because this woman knew everything about how to make this client work better, and they really needed that to happen, but no one listened to her at all, because they didn't think that she knew what she was talking about. Even if I said that she did, it didn't matter. So basically, though, I did finally get her into an APICS class. Actually helped her so that she could do that, because I really thought that would help. And she ended up going to the class, and after the first class, it gave her the language that other people wanted her to use, and it was more of a common language. And she told me that after that class, they started listening to her because she sounded like she knew what she was talking about. She knew all along, because actually all I did is implement what she had already. You know, I asked her questions, and I implemented what she had told me, and it worked, and everything was great. But no one gave her any credit. So that was great, because it was really fun to see that they actually paid a little bit of attention to her anyway, after she started using the right words.
But that whole thing of not being recognized, it's like, one of the first projects I did was implementing an ERP system at Harmon. And that company, the one thing they did was allow me to have an outside consultant who came in once a month to then review for the day what was going on, and then report to management how we were doing and make sure that we were on progress. And what I discovered was that as he would come in every day, and he would meet with me and the 3 other people that were on our team to implement it. And he would say, "Okay, what areas do you want me to look at today?" So we would tell him what we wanted him to look at. And we would basically say, this is what we would like to get management to do. And the result was I was then allowed to come to the management meeting at the end of the day. And 9 times out of 10, what he said to them was exactly what I had said to him in the morning. So, but it's like and I found this also as a consultant. Companies are willing to pay for your knowledge, but they don't believe you when you work for them.
It's true.
So,
It's true.
go figure.
I'd like to jump ahead to 9.
Okay.
Flip it. So, in October of this year, our Governor Jerry Brown signed a law that says by 2019, companies need to have at least one woman on their board of directors. And if they have 5 or more, and if they have 5 or more, they need at least 2 women on their boards. What kind of impact do you guys think this will have? And what do you think about this in general? Does it help equality, or where does it put us, I guess, as women?
Well, I can tell you that we put together an executive panel and networking symposiums in APICS Inland Empire. And again, I never paid any attention to men, women, doesn't matter. It's just qualified people. So for our first several panels, apparently we found both. And then there was one panel, it's like we've been doing it for, I don't know, like 8 years or something. One panel, a couple of years in, was all men. And I of course didn't notice that either. And then I got all this feedback though from the audience saying, where's the women on your panel? What's going on? What are you are you like biased? And I was no, I didn't even think about it. So anyway, so from then on I had to make sure that I found a woman for the panel since I didn't want to get all this hate mail. And usually it was very doable, but I have to say it wasn't easy because you don't want to downgrade the quality in order to find a woman. So I think that's the situation is that we have to continue to see ourselves as qualified, because that's what I find is most often the problem with women is not that they're not qualified, but they don't see themselves, so therefore they don't have the confidence to keep going and do better. So I think if we have to step up to the plate, because otherwise it's going to be really hard. We don't want to have women on boards that make terrible decisions. I mean, not all women are like better to work for than men, or vice versa. So anyway, that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think quotas are, the danger of quotas is you're gonna feed that stereotype. And although, I am so not in favor of quotas, this needs to evolve organically,
Yes.
although it's gonna take so much longer. But I mean, look at what affirmative action at the universities did for us. And I read this and went, oh my God, no, please tell me it's not so. How do you feel about that, Shannon?
Well, there's a list of companies that are in that list, and one of them I worked for 10 years until I made a recommendation that they employ someone to work for me, and they gave me my job. That company still has never had a female member on their directors. And that company is the longest running company in California. They have Bank of America account number 1. So maybe,
Worse than the
you
thing,
know,
I guess.
those are the kind of companies that need to have somebody tell them they have to do it, because they're not going to do it.
Yeah, but those are the companies that will then put a token woman.
Because
forward.
If they're
Whatever
lucky,
they want
they'll
her
get a
to do.
token like you,
Yeah.
There's pros and
comments,
cons, right? I think the challenge is gonna be, and I've read some things, that to find enough really qualified women to put on those panels, because the
Yes.
problem is that we haven't been pushing women into the next level to where they're ready for those roles. But what's been happening is companies are doing a lot of stuff in diversity and in development of people, and there are a lot of people in kind of those second level, mid-level management that are really gonna have an opportunity to shine. And I hope that people will rise to the occasion, and we're gonna find some really good things happen. That's what I'm hopeful of.
I mean, there was an article in the LA Times this morning about, I don't know if anybody saw it, the Wikipedia. There was a woman that just won the Nobel Prize in some science, I forgot what it was.
I know what you're talking about.
And she had no Wikipedia page. And Wikipedia, this was an article written by the head of, who's a woman of Wikipedia, who said that they realized that the people that put pages up on Wikipedia, because they have like volunteers that do that, but they're mostly men, and they are now looking specifically at the fact, because they can look at it through, you know, all these bots that they run, all of, analysis that they run on the pages. They discovered that they have very few key women listed with their own Wikipedia pages. And that's partly because there's not a lot of articles written about top women. And so until this woman got the Nobel Prize, they didn't have a page for her. So I thought that was really interesting.
I'd like to go on to one last question before we open it to the floor for open forum. Currently in manufacturing, women make up about 1/3 of the workforce. However, the overall workforce is approximately 50% women in America. How would you encourage more women to join manufacturing?
I think it helps, well, obviously, women should be encouraging women, so it's up to the people that are already in to try to encourage other women to get in. But it also is really helpful when the men are encouraging too, so it shouldn't just be on the women to help the women. I can say that I grew up in a household where my dad and his 2 brothers are engineers, and I ended up going to an engineering school myself, and I was told that I could do anything I wanted, and that I was capable of everything, and I believed that very early on. So I think that is key in me approaching anything in my life, of just saying, okay, I can do it. If I want to do it and I put my mind to it, I'm totally capable of doing it and achieving and being excellent at things. So as long as the men can help, because I feel like in general, and this goes kind of back to the mentoring conversation, I think like it's been important for me to have women as mentors, and it doesn't mean I didn't learn from men, but I think that any time that a man has been open-minded and encouraging, or really just didn't block me or another woman, it doesn't have to be me, but to see somebody that encourages or lifts up another woman and doesn't treat her as differently just because she is a woman, that is helpful in itself. So that goes a long way.
Yeah, that reminds me, because I mean, my dad was the same way. Both my parents were of the thought that you could do anything you set your mind to. So I never thought that anything wasn't possible. And that was probably eminently helpful in terms of being successful, because I never worried about all these things that everyone else seems to worry about. Like, you know, you don't have experience in this area, so you probably can't do that. Why not? The reason I got the job at Coca-Cola, it said you have to have like X number of experience, this, that, and the other, and I applied anyway and said, well, I have this project I did, and this is the experience that relates from it, and they said, okay. So, I mean, I think that helps a lot. But I would have to say from that point of view, really, you know, like Ellen probably is the expert here, because she started the student case competition like 10, 12 years ago, right? So, I mean, basically that's how, you know, and she got me involved early on, so we've been doing it ever since, and I think it's important to stick with the students. I have to say that, like earlier today I was at Cal Poly Pomona, and there was at least half women, don't you think, Diane, because she was there with me? And then Harvey Mudd has, their percentages are 51% women in their engineering and manufacturing programs, and they actually have women going out into manufacturing jobs now, which is great, because they could go to like Google or somewhere that sounds more exciting. But they actually go to manufacturers, so I think it's the younger generation. But I won't take up all the time.
Well, I'd say anytime you have a chance, even much younger than that, right? Because what kids in grade school and junior high see when they think of what a career is, they only know what they have brushed against so far in their life. And very few of them have been in a factory. So, you know, if we don't promote manufacturing or talk about where things come from or how they're made, or expose kids to the now television that has created all these nice how it's made, a lot of those series, and kids are fascinated with how stuff is made, but they, you know, unless we actively tie the things they have, that they have to be produced and have to be made, kids won't make that connection. They don't know that those are good paying jobs or how to get those jobs. So I think it's on all of us to help encourage, because manufacturing is gonna have a problem, men or women. There won't be enough employees. There just aren't gonna be enough employees for everything we need employees for. So we're gonna be competing with every industry and every job that looks more glamorous or more interesting. We have to make it interesting and help them connected. So I think if you get a chance to do that, if you have your own, if you have kids or your nieces, nephews, grandchildren, wherever the kids are in your life, if you help make those connections, then they'll be more interested in it.
STEM, I mean, I'm a big supporter of STEM. I mean, if you get them young and, you know, again, part of it's an expectation. You will be good in math, you can be good in science, there's no reason why you need to, you know, go into journalism or whatever. Just lay out that expectation and give them the exposure to science and technology.
So, I'd like to open it to the floor if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask. Shannon?
Yeah, a couple of you earlier said that had situations where people said, I'm not working for her. Okay? But I've heard several times my wife's friends and even my wife saying, I can't stand working for women. What is the issue there?
Well, you know, so I was gonna bring this up, but there was like a lot of conversation around the mentors. I don't know if this is something that affects all industries, but we didn't touch on the fact that sometimes women can be very competitive amongst other women, so there aren't a lot of spots for women in general, and as we all are trying to pave our own way and find our identity and try to stand out amongst the men, I think that sometimes women feel like they have to step on other women to get ahead. So I think that there's that, and what I was going to say in regards to mentors is that some people who probably did not even want to be a mentor to me, one way or another were, because I learned from them, and I said, okay, I don't want to be like that, or there are things about them that I see that other people do respect, or maybe they have a certain method, so I took what I could from them, even if they maybe didn't know it, but that shouldn't stop us from learning, but that I think does come into play, because I've come home many nights and told Amanda, I don't know if all of you know that we're roommates and we're best friends, I've come home many nights and told her, I cannot stand this woman that I'm working for, and her resume is amazing, and I feel like I should be able to look at her as a mentor, and it's so disappointing that she don't feel, maybe I think that she feels threatened by me, whether it's an age thing, or if she feels like, you know, there's just a personality clash, or you know, there's one man in the mix, and sometimes it's like women amongst women are fine, the dynamic is one way, and then once a man enters that, it's, I don't know, everyone's trying to one-up each other. There's just a lot of things I think that come into play, at least that I've seen, and I don't know if that affects everybody else, if you all have had similar experiences, or if you feel like it's something different, but I think that does come into play, because I've had it many times. I've had more female managers and bosses than male managers and bosses, specifically in what I do, and at least half of them I couldn't stand working for.
But I would say the same thing about the men I've worked for.
Do you feel a difference? Because I worked for the first 35 years of my career, I worked exclusively for men. And my last position was the first time, I mean, I thought I almost got out scot-free, but I ran into this woman at the very end. And the dynamic was so different to me, and it was the threatened piece that you talked about. We worked, particularly now, I think generations behind us will find it easier, but you kill yourself to get to where you are, and you guard it very carefully. And there's a territorialism, there's a selfishness, I don't know what the adjectives are, but I feel it and it's real. And I never believed that it was out there and real until I experienced it myself. I was like, whoa, what is this?
So I might, I'll add a little anecdote to that. So we have in the workplace stereotypes of how we expect men to behave. So I joined the company I worked for about 3.5 years ago, and I was just doing my job and trying to jump in and help change things and make things happen. And somebody had complained to another female manager who's been with the company 18 years. And she was wise and smart, and she turned it around and said, well, if that was this other person, male, doing that, would you be complaining? If they were doing this and they were male, would you be complaining? If they were this and male and doing would you be complaining? And she made them stop and think that they wouldn't have complained at all, and that that would have been expected of someone in that role, regardless male or female. And they were only complaining because their stereotypes said that Shannon is a nice lady, should not be doing that. I should not be holding people accountable. So
You're still a nice lady.
The little advice though about that, and I think that women tend to do this wrong, and that's what makes it hard to work with other women, is that they think they have to be like the guys. Don't stoop to that sort of ugly language. You know why? Because that ugly language is getting a lot of them in trouble right now.
Yeah.
And it's coming back to haunt them big time, right? The way they've spoken to people, the way their language has been, the way there's been, you know, like no filtering and making the workplace professional, the kind of jokes that are told. And I've seen women who, in order to try to fit in, do that. And so then you wonder why women can't get along, or I don't want any part of that, right? Because I just want to rise above that and treat people respectfully and professionally, and to never have any of that come back and haunt me. So, you know, don't think you need to be like that. And I think the workplace is really changing, and it's gotten better and better. Language has gotten much better and less offensive in the workplace in the years that I've worked there, and less offensive meaning towards women. There's a lot of offensive language, or you might call it strong language or angry language that comes out of people in emotion. It's all directed at females. That language is not, you know, the kinds of words that are used. And that's, you know, we have to all work on making that go away.
It's sort of interesting with some of my friends or with people that I feel comfortable with, I have occasionally blurted out a swear word and then gone, oops, and said my excuse was, oh, I worked in manufacturing. So, I didn't really, I personally never really faced that because there were so few women in the environment that I was in. And for many of the companies as a consultant, the key people that I've interfaced with were women, and only one time did I ever have a problem with somebody. And at that point, I went to the owner of the company and said, you know, maybe I'm not the right person to be your consultant, because the person that I have to work with seems to have a problem. And he made us get together and figure out what the issue was, and then we were fine.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I really didn't run into that problem either, because mostly my bosses were all men. But the women I had were really great as well. So I think it's just, there are bad managers, whether men or women. Now, the women bad managers tend to be more catty, like you were saying. But there's, like Ellen said, there's just definitely bad managers. But that said, I'm with you though, because there was one guy I worked for who was the worst one I worked for, who I learned something from, like exactly what not to do.
Yes.
And you know, it was really helpful though. I mean, I didn't want to do it a long term, but it was helpful to have that experience. And you know, so it's, you just, you know, it depends on if you run across one of the bad ones, right? Whether they're women or men.
Anybody else have questions in the audience? So I'd like to say a very sincere thank you to all of the women. We really appreciate you sharing with us tonight. So let's hear it.